Alright, this morning we're going to learn in PowerShell how to check if a file exists. This does relate to a former video that we were going over, and that's how to rename a file in PowerShell. Well, what if you want to look and see if the file exists first? So I'll get into what we were doing previously in a second, but let's just go over how to do that. So we had a file in the previous video which was file.txt under C files. So first I'll do that. So we're going to look at the old file, which was C files. Hold on. Files file.txt. That's the path of this. Okay, so we want to test if the file exists. We want to do a check. So if test path, which is checking if the file exists, if it exists, what we want to do is we want for it to tell us that it exists. And then you can rename it now. And again, this, like I said, this relates to the previous video of the PowerShell video about renaming files. And remember, you can run PowerShell scripts from SQL Server Agent. So you can, before you import a file in SQL Server Agent, you can check if the file exists. Okay, so if the file exists, and this is the logic right here, if test path old, and old, which we've declared as an object, relates to this path right here, this file, if it exists, we're going to say the file exists, you can rename it now. Else, we're going to echo, which basically is just going to print to this screen, the file does not exist, try again in 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and execute it, and it says file exists, you can rename it now. And again, we can look and we can see, okay, the file does exist. Alright, let's remove the file. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of it. I'm going to wait a little bit and we'll, clear our screen, and let's execute it now. The file does not exist, try again in 5 minutes. Okay, so why is this important? Okay, give you just a perfect example of this situation. Currently in production right now, we check and see if a 17 gigabyte file exists, I believe it is, or 20 gigabyte file, it's pretty big, before we import it. Well, they have an SSIS package of all things, and I've discussed this in previous videos about SSIS, but they have an SSIS package which executes a C# script that checks if the file exists, and if it doesn't exist, it does this loop. That could easily be done in SQL Server Agent with PowerShell. You do not need C#, you do not need an SSIS package, and every time this issue causes a problem, it takes them about an hour and a half to resolve, because they have to reload the package, reload the configuration tables, the configuration files, etc., etc. And again, you can see how simple this is to do in PowerShell. I mean, technically, and for the record, you don't need this. You could just have a simple if right here. You could even get rid of this and then have your import here. So it's a piece of cake to do. It's not super complicated. And so when we were talking about the previous video, renaming a file, if you want to first of all check and see if the file exists, you could check and see here, and then you would run your rename item that we had. So basically the step where we were renaming the file, this is where you would run it here. So as you can see, again, this is really simple, really quick. Provided that your PowerShell permissions are in SQL Server Agent, in other words, you can access whatever drive it needs to, you can run this from SQL Server Agent. So then there's no need to use something like SSIS to execute a C# script. And when it comes to troubleshooting, as I always say, I mean, like, yes, if you're working with 100% of your developers can do SSIS, great. But if your developers can also do PowerShell, then it's much faster to do PowerShell, especially if you're finding that it's taking your team hours to troubleshoot. So again, it depends on what's faster for you, what's faster for your environment, and what other developers in your environment know as well. So as you can see, that's how you check if a file exists. Once you verify the file exists, whatever you need to do with it, whether you need to import it, rename it, you name it, or again, you can go and you can do some of the research. You could start a timer if it doesn't exist and re-loop through that timer and check again, and so on and so forth, which is what their SSIS package in .NET does.